They thought she wouldn't show up. Washington, D.C., late October. The air was heavy with whispers. The corridors of the Capitol filled with nervous aides and political sharks. The hearing room? Already full. Not a protest, not a speech, but a trial. And at the center of it, a name that had become too dangerous to ignore. Jasmine Crockett. They accused her of abusing power. Said she used her political influence to silence opposition, to make private gain from public trust. But if you'd seen her walk into that courtroom, you'd understand something most people missed. She wasn't there to defend herself. She was there to expose them. Across from her sat Judge Clarence Thomas, not in his usual robes, but as the lead figure of a panel formed to protect the integrity of the judiciary. The irony, he had once been a symbol of justice. Today he looked like a man trying to bury the last person who remembered what justice really meant. As Jasmine sat, the cameras rolled. Her eyes scanned the room, not with fear, but with fire. She had seen these kinds of rooms before, cold, powerful, and waiting for someone like her to fall apart. But she didn't come to fall. She came with boxes full of records, dates, testimonies. And she came with something they didn't expect, a voice that would not tremble, and a truth they had no defense against. Before they could even begin, she leaned into the mic and said, "If this room is where you want the truth to die, you better make sure I'm not breathing when you lock that door." People froze. The headlines that morning were cruel. Crockett on trial, power-hungry politician faces reckoning, Judge Thomas to hold her accountable. But they didn't know what was coming, because what Jasmine had wasn't just evidence. It was a storm, and it was about to hit the courtroom. You ever felt like the entire system was built to watch you burn while others danced in your ashes? That's exactly how Jasmine had felt, until today. And you? What would you do if the whole machine turned against you? Tell us in the comments. We're listening. This is just the beginning. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what happens next will shock you. The first blow wasn't a question. It was a trap. Judge Clarence Thomas cleared his throat. The room fell still again. "Ms. Crockett," he said, deliberately slow, "you are here because we believe you have crossed ethical lines multiple times. We have evidence that suggests manipulation, coercion, and political exploitation. How do you plead?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't look at the reporters scribbling or the committee members hiding behind titles. She stared directly at Clarence Thomas, and then she smiled, just slightly. "I plead tired," she said. "Tired of men like you pretending to protect the law while using it as a shield to hide behind." A few gasps, one chuckle, then silence again. Thomas shifted in his seat. He reached for a folder, thin, unimpressive, and pulled out a document. "This is a signed affidavit from a former staffer in your office. It alleges that you intervened in a federal contract decision, that you directed influence toward companies tied to campaign donors." Jasmine leaned forward. "Read the name on that affidavit," she said. He paused, glanced down. His lips tightened. "It's redacted." "And there it is," she replied. "A ghost witness, a faceless claim, and you're calling this a courtroom?" The tension was real now. It wasn't just a battle of facts, it was personal. Jasmine wasn't just defending her career, she was dismantling the entire performance, brick by brick. But this was only round one. She opened her own folder, and out came the receipts, emails, meeting notes, even transcripts of private conversations where other committee members, Thomas's own allies, were caught joking about smearing the firebrand. "They didn't care if it was true," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "They just wanted a headline, and you gave them the platform." Somewhere in the back, an intern dropped their pen. It echoed. You see, this wasn't just politics. This was betrayal. The system had taught Jasmine how to play by the rules, then punished her for learning them too well, and now that same system was trying to erase her. But she had come prepared for every twist, every trap, every insult disguised as due process. Have you ever been blamed for something just because you didn't fit into the mold? Ever been told to sit down just because you dared to stand up? Tell us in the comments, Because this fight isn't just hers, and it's far from over. They didn't expect her to fight back like that. The air was different now. What began as a prosecution had turned into a slow unraveling. Overwhelming of lies, of power games, of the kind of quiet corruption that hides behind marble walls and velvet chairs. And Jasmine, she was no longer just defending herself. She was pulling the curtain back on all of it. One by one, she laid out her case, not just against the accusation, but against the accusers. "You want to talk about political favors?" she asked, holding up another document. "Let's talk about Justice Thomas's own financial disclosures, or lack of them." A shift in the room. Someone cleared their throat. A committee aide leaned over and whispered urgently to another. But Jasmine wasn't done. "That same company I'm accused of favoring," she continued, "they never got the contract. You know who did? A corporation whose board includes your friend, Senator Langford. And the emails show you knew." For a moment, Judge Thomas didn't speak. His eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone, Ms. Crockett." And she did something that no one expected. She laughed. "Tone?" she repeated. "You're on a first-name basis with billionaires who buy paintings and policies in the same transaction? And my tone is the threat here?" It wasn't defiance for the sake of pride. It was pain. Years of watching how the system protects itself, how it feeds off people like her. Smart, unafraid, unbought. She was no longer just sitting at that table for herself. She was speaking for every woman who had ever been labeled too loud, for every activist turned suspect, every servant of the people turned scapegoat. And they knew it. People outside the building had started gathering, protesters, supporters, journalists. The crowd was growing. They couldn't hear every word, but they could feel the shift. Inside, the committee tried to regain control. "Let's refocus," one of them said. "This hearing isn't about the court. It's about you." And Jasmine, without missing a beat, replied, "No, it's always been about you. I'm just the one who finally said it out loud." You ever seen someone stand in a room built to crush them and refuse to shrink? You ever seen someone tell the truth even when they knew it might cost them everything? Tell us in the comments, because this is one of those moments you don't forget. The moment they crossed the line. They could have kept it political. They could have stayed on the surface, contracts, committees, vague accusations. But they didn't, because when the facts didn't work, they reached for something lower. They went after her family. Judge Clarence Thomas adjusted his glasses, voice cold. "We've reviewed certain financial ties involving your brother, Darnell Crockett. He received a grant from a nonprofit, one you supported publicly. Would you care to explain the coincidence?" The room didn't gasp this time. It went silent in a different way. Heavy, violent, like the air had been slapped. Jasmine's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. For a second, just one, you could see it. The pain she tried to bury. Her brother wasn't a politician. He was a teacher. A quiet man who ran a community reading center in Detroit, who never asked her for favors and never once tried to use her name for anything. "That nonprofit," she said slowly, "gives out hundreds of grants every year. My brother didn't even know I'd endorsed it until after he applied. But you knew that. You just needed dirt." Clarence didn't blink. "So you deny that you leveraged your position to help him?" And this time she didn't shout. She didn't argue. She looked straight into the camera, to the people watching, the people who had been told to believe she was corrupt. Cold, calculated. "My family has sacrificed everything so I could do this job," she said. "My mother still lives in the same house she raised us in. My brother works 2 jobs and still tutors kids at night. And you're dragging their names through the mud because you couldn't beat me any other way." Her voice cracked. And that's when the room changed. The cameras didn't show it, but a few committee members shifted uncomfortably. One of them looked down, ashamed. Because for the first time, it wasn't Jasmine on trial, it was them. "You can twist emails, you can redact names, but you do not get to rewrite my story," she said, voice rising again. "You do not get to punish me for being everything this system was never built for. Black, bold, and unwilling to play quiet." Outside, the crowd was growing louder. Not in protest, but in support. Because what they saw inside that chamber wasn't a scandal. It was strength. Have you ever watched someone tear down your name because they couldn't touch your truth? Let us know in the comments. We read every one. The silence broke from within. For hours, the hearing had been a slow march through cold accusations and colder silence. The weight of every word pressed down like a ceiling about to cave in. Jasmine Crockett sat calm, but inside she could feel the burn, the kind that only comes when you have been cornered for too long. And then something impossible happened. A voice broke through, not from a protester outside, not from her legal counsel. It came from the other side of the aisle. Senator Ronald Reedman, a senior Republican, white-haired, iron-spined, a man who had sat through wars of legislation without blinking, the kind of man who didn't speak unless it served a purpose. But now his voice was shaking. "I've kept my silence out of habit," he began, tapping his pen against the desk like a nervous tell. "But watching you sit there and take hit after hit, knowing full well most of it doesn't hold water, I can't stay silent anymore." Gasps, confused glances. Jasmine didn't move, but her eyes narrowed, studying him. "I've known Representative Crockett since she was a public defender, fighting for people this government long forgot," he said. "And no, I haven't always liked her style. She's loud when others whisper. She pushes when most politicians pivot. But if that's now a crime, then maybe we're the ones who should be sitting where she is." Even Clarence Thomas looked stunned. This wasn't a part of the plan. Reedman had always voted the line, played the game. But now he was burning the whole board. Jasmine blinked once, long enough to fight back the lump in her throat. She didn't ask for allies. She didn't expect them. But when one voice breaks from the silence, it shatters something far bigger. The illusion that everyone agrees with the lie. "I want the record to reflect," Reedman said, louder now, "that not everyone on this panel supports this circus." And outside, the story began to shift. Local reporters who came expecting another easy takedown started digging. And what they found buried beneath campaign filings and committee records. Luxury retreats paid by lobbyists, undisclosed donations linked to committee chairs, emails from staffers joking about making an example out of Jasmine. She wasn't a villain. She was a warning shot they hadn't planned on bouncing back. As the walls started cracking, Jasmine opened a new folder. Thin, neat, labeled Ethics Committee, Internal Correspondence. The room went still. This wasn't defense. This was offense. "You thought I came here to beg for mercy," she said, her voice low but electric. "But I came with something else. Your blueprint, your signatures, your silence." And now she had the floor. Have you ever watched someone go from the accused to the accuser, not by rage, but by proof? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every word. The secret she was never supposed to tell. The room had stopped breathing. Jasmine Crockett didn't yell. She didn't slam her fist or raise her voice. That's not what made people lean in. It was the quiet, the slow, deliberate way she opened that folder, as if she already knew the foundation beneath their feet was about to crack. "Before I read this," she said calmly, "I want you all to remember something. I didn't ask for this fight. I didn't ask to be dragged through the headlines. I didn't ask for my family to be pulled into this circus. But since you brought me here, I came ready." She pulled out the first page. It wasn't dramatic. It was clean, typed, sharp. "This email," she said, "was sent from the private server of Judge Clarence Thomas on September 4th. Subject, containment strategy. The recipients include Senator Mallory and 2 unnamed committee members. But the language, well, that speaks loudly." She began to read aloud. "We need to begin building a narrative early. Paint her as emotionally unstable, politically reckless. Use the ethics committee as a vessel. Don't give her time to pivot." People froze. Even the whispering stopped. She flipped the page. Paragraph 2. "Leak preliminary findings to targeted outlets. Engage friendly voice on cable news. Neutralize support with a slow drip smear campaign. Make her exhaustion the evidence." She looked up. "Make my exhaustion the evidence?" she repeated. You didn't even need facts. You just needed fatigue. Judge Thomas opened his mouth, but no sound came. And then came the next blow. Jasmine pulled out a second document, this one older, yellowed, scanned. It wasn't an email, it was a handwritten memo. At the bottom, in block print, in a familiar signature. Crockett first, break her spirit early. CT, the courtroom didn't gasp. It groaned because everyone knew what those initials meant. Clarence Thomas wasn't just a passive participant in a political show. He was the architect. Jasmine's hands didn't shake as she laid the memo down. Her voice didn't tremble, but her eyes told the truth. She was tired, not from guilt, from carrying the weight of a war no one warned her would be this ugly. You planned this, she said, not because I broke a law, but because I refused to bow. A reporter stood in the back, slowly raising their phone to record. Another committee member, a junior senator, shifted uncomfortably and whispered to an aide, "This isn't going how we thought." Jasmine leaned forward into the microphone again. "I want everyone watching this, at home, in their cars, in classrooms, in churches, to understand something. This system wasn't built to protect truth. It was built to protect itself." And then came the line that would headline every paper the next morning. "You tried to bury me, but you buried me alive." Outside, the crowd erupted, not in anger, in solidarity, because what they saw in that moment wasn't just a woman fighting for herself. They saw someone fighting for every voice that's ever been drowned out by a lie. And that's when the fear changed sides. Have you ever watched the powerful panic, not because of rage, but because someone finally had receipts? Have you ever been pushed down for standing too tall? Let us know in the comments, because some stories need to be told more than once. They tried to shame her. She walked out a giant. After hours of crossfire, silence, and revelation, the committee reconvened. But this wasn't the same room anymore. Something had shifted. The air was no longer tense. It was thick with reckoning. Clarence Thomas sat still, eyes hollow. His hands no longer tapped. He didn't look at Jasmine Crockett. He couldn't, because the damage was done. But not to her. The chair of the ethics committee, an older woman who had tried to keep the storm contained, cleared her throat. "We will now move to final statements and votes." The room stiffened. One by one, the members of the panel, some red-faced with embarrassment, others rigid with shame, cast their votes. "Guilty," one said weakly. "Not guilty," said the next. "Not proven." "Unsubstantiated." "Motion to dismiss." And then the line that would echo through news broadcasts, community halls, and kitchen tables across America. "All charges against Representative Jasmine Crockett are hereby dropped." There was no applause inside, only a slow, suffocating silence. But outside, the steps of the Capitol trembled under thousands of voices. They chanted her name over and over, not in protest but in honor. "Jasmine, Jasmine, Jasmine." Inside, Jasmine didn't smile. Not yet. She rose quietly, eyes scanning the faces of the people who had tried to unmake her. Some avoided her gaze. Others looked down. A few surprisingly nodded with something like respect, or maybe fear. And then, for the first time in the entire ordeal, she spoke without defense, without anger, with clarity. "This hearing was never about justice," she said. "It was about survival, about how far someone would go to silence a woman who refused to shrink." She paused. "I didn't win today because I had better lawyers. I won because I came in with the one thing no one in this room could fabricate: truth. And I carried it, even when it crushed me." Her voice cracked, just for a moment, and then came the words that would define her forever. "You called this a trial, I call it a lesson. And I hope the next girl watching this from her dorm room or her grandmother's couch knows they don't get to decide who you are. You do." She gathered her papers, tightened her blazer, nodded once, and walked out, through the same doors they had hoped would become her downfall. But she didn't walk out a defendant. She walked out a giant. In the days that followed, something strange happened in America. People who never paid attention to politics stopped scrolling. Barbershop radios played her speech. Churches repeated her closing words in Sunday sermons. Old men at diners whispered, "That girl from Texas, she didn't back down." And young women, They watched it all on their phones, fists clenched, eyes wide, believing for the first time that maybe, just maybe, they could do it too. Because this wasn't just about a verdict. This was about proof that the system could bend, not to power but to truth. And Jasmine Crockett, she didn't just walk out free, she walked out as a blueprint. What about you? Have you ever stuffed up for what was right when every force around you said to sit down? Tell us in the comments. Someone else might need to hear your courage. Subscribe so you never miss stories that remind you what bravery truly looks like.